are you?
Making it happen.
I'm at this gorgeous, it's this cafe, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's a little loud, but like the Wi-Fi, it wasn't working, and so I was trying to figure it out.
Oh, no worries. It happens. Technology. That's cool.
Yeah.
I love this sort of, we're like on the same color scheme vibe, but it just indicates I'm on the East Coast, deep in the winter. You're in Hawaii, enjoying that climate. It's cool. It's an interesting balance.
Yeah, no, it's so beautiful here, and the weather has been really nice. The place that I'm at right now, there's all of these butterflies, so it's sort of that season. So they're
Good
all
sign.
over the place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's lovely.
How have you been?
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's been an interesting couple of years, as I think it's been for everybody, so I have had a lot of really great time to get mindful and use the moments of isolation or the feeling that there's not enough going on to really attend to what's happening in spirit and cultivate a little bit more patience to line it up, line up the energy so that when the time is right, that can be used more incisively and powerfully to the things that I want. I think we tend to move through life a little bit more passive, not so active, which is ironic because what I'm really talking about is the idea of sitting in some silence and rest, which sounds passive, but I'm speaking to how active it can be to use that time and solitude to really engineer the way you want life to be, as in a more active life, being a more active participant to your life. And when life around you was a lot more active, which let's say it was 2+ years ago, we go with that energetic flow. And that's cool, except I think we can get caught up in allowing life to take us on the tide of the other energies we're around. X person is going in that direction, we hop on the bandwagon and go there, or Y or Z. Are we really in the driver's seat of our lives? Are we mindful about being the pilot? And so the one thing that I can say that's been so beautiful about this time and some of the flux that I have felt through this time was in recognizing that like I can actually get a little bit more deliberate about what I want this life to look like and why. Because when the why empowers the what, the momentum is fast and strong. When you're not very clear on the why, as in the purpose, the meaning of your work, you can quickly burn out, or it's dilute to begin with, or you're following a path that's sort of a bit faded relative
it's
to
not necessarily authentic to you.
Exactly, which I see in bright color, crisp color, versus maybe something muddled, if we were to give it a painting or art analogy. So yes, thank you for asking.
Yeah, no, I was curious. I see, I'll see your posts, or ever since you and I had that one interview, I've just been thinking back and like, oh, how is everything going? So
yes.
I just think so many people during the pandemic, we had so many different things happening to us, and as far as our own life experiences, just experienced life differently from different perspectives. So it's nice to hear that, you're doing stuff active with your, your vision and your mission.
Trying to be mindful, girl. Trying to be mindful with that time and how I receive the time and the energy, because you are so right. A lot of us, most of us have experienced this time with a dose of grief. And that has, I think, come from a place of loss in general, though that loss has not always been sort of a physical overt loss. Although I've had some of that, to speak to what you were alluding to with some of my posts, becoming aware a few days after this new year that my ex-husband was killed in a car crash, and, going through some losses of friendships and other things happening in the last couple of years. So not the direct loss that some people may have experienced through this time in losing, the physical presence of somebody to, the ethereal world, right? Their reincarnation to the cosmic realm, or back to the mother realm. But, all kinds of loss as sort of side effects or offshoots of this time. In general, I may posit or hypothesize that one of the things that my ex-husband may have undergone or gone through this time was a feeling of deep isolation, and he was not alone in that regard. And we have not been so attentive or mindful to the mental health consequences of what's been happening.
Yeah.
And I've been very blessed, I think, to have just followed a journey where I had the skills. I picked up the skills to be autonomously empowered around how to deal with things like that, how to, let's say, spin them to my advantage mentally. And yet we're not also blessed and lucky, which is why I do a lot of the teaching that I do. But it really hit home for me when that happened, that it was somebody that I had been so close to, and yet geographically he's in India, so quite far away. And I couldn't help him in the way that I would have wanted to. And part of that is also just that we don't attend to the mental sphere the way that we do the physical. And that's something that should and needs to change.
Yeah, I talk to people a lot about that, just when it comes to a self-care perspective and the empowerment work that I do. So I have people imagine, what would life be like if everybody had that basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs taken care of. You fed, you're sheltered, you have these needs met, you feel loved, you feel supported. What would the world be like? It would be a completely different place.
100%.
Yeah.
I think when Maslow crafted this brilliant structure for how we see and meet our needs and what that does to our psychology, it was in a time that obviously looks very different than now. And one of those factors, right, is how for most of our evolution until like literally the last 10 to 20 years, right? Oh, my hand is raised. Like, I love how my devices do that automatically, but sometimes it's like, yo, you off the mark. So, but preach. So, literally in the last couple of decades, we have had this exponential, and it is exponential because now it is going like this, right? In terms of how we interact with technology. So most of our evolution, 99.99999% of it thus far, was a world without all of that technology.
Yes.
And so we were together in connection, tribal communication, right? The very existence of tribes was most of our evolution. And so we were just around people naturally, inherently, all the time. And now we've got this odd phenomenon happening where we've siloed ourselves using our devices. We're not getting the connection that our brains have been hardwired to need and crave.
Yeah.
And so I think what you were sort of getting at, if I was reading between the lines or hearing between the lines of what you were saying, which was very apt, is that, that communion and connection should be one of Maslow's needs, right? It should be in the hierarchy. And I think for that reason, it's not really thought of that way, but it sort of comes back to the theme of what we're talking about, which is, as the times change, we sort of have to reconfigure. And one of those ways is in attuning more to the mental space. And mindfulness, is one of my areas of passion and expertise, is one of the ways that we can really begin to cultivate a better frame of being, with the psychological.
Yeah. Well, and Paxton, I'm doing this a little bit backwards because normally I do my introduction. I say, welcome to the Empowered Hour. I introduce myself, I introduce you. Do you want to just introduce yourself to the audience, share a little bit about the work that you do with mindfulness? Because I think it's so powerful and important.
And I like that we're changing it up. Remix, you know, that's what it's all about. It keeps us agile. And we're being mindful to that too. Let's not get stuck in routines. So love that you're changing it up. That's mad fresh. My name is Pax Tandon. And Pax is actually short for Prakriti, which means nature in Sanskrit, which is the ancient language of India, the language of yoga. If you practice yoga, then you would have heard many of these poses called asanas in Sanskrit called out in the mother tongue, right? So that's where the sort of origin of my name, Prakriti in Sanskrit meaning nature. It's a little bit more subtle than that. And I like to talk about that too, just because it's so beautiful to recognize the subtlety of names. And that helps us understand ourselves better, why we were given those names, how we embody those names. So Prakriti is in fact part of a duality in the cosmos, where Purusha is the unmanifest cosmic potential, and Prakriti, nature, is all you see that is manifest in this natural material world. So that's kind of the sort of one route simplest definition of my name. I these days practice, teach, and attune mainly to the realm of mindfulness. This was after many years of studying well-being modalities, and I came to that from the media world. So I was really invested in media as a way to propagate information, positive change. I found the power of that in high school. Actually, I was chosen to be on this show, which was like a teen talk show, you know, in the tri-state area. It was dope. And I loved the challenge of it, being able to show up on camera. It was all live. There were no retakes. Sometimes they didn't, you know, throw it out live, but there were no edits, you know, so like what you see is what you get. And I loved the challenge and dynamism of that modality. I also quickly realized as a little high schooler that now in the era of YouTube, you know, high school is not little, like we've got 2-year-olds making their name, you know, in the media world, but back then it didn't exist. It's like totally crazy different worlds. It was at the high school level, 16 or 17 years old, where being on television was very rare. And I discovered a power in it. You know, I had teenagers coming up to me saying, I saw that episode that you did on, let's say, depression, right? And I was so moved by that. It helped me to understand that it's okay to ask for help, right? That kind of thing. And I was like, wow, oh, that's powerful. This is good stuff. So that kept me entrenched in the television media world for a while. The sort of peak of that was as a news anchor on CNBC in India. And I just realized that I wanted not to use my skills in that area to bum people out, you know, with news, make them depressed and anxious, but actually uplift them, you know, and cultivate this mass positive change that I've always been committed to. So I went back to the University of Pennsylvania, which was also my alma mater undergrad, and studied positive psychology, which is the science of well-being. And that just opened a lot of doors to much of what I am committed to, not just practicing, but teaching in my life. One of those was mindfulness. And among the many, yoga, past life regression therapy, psychological safety, coaching, among these many certifications that I picked up alongside the graduate degree in past psych, I came to realize and understand that mindfulness was really the foundation of all of this, that if you had this practice in your life and you worked with it, all of the other great well-being initiatives had that much better of a chance of sticking in your life, you know, and of being cultivated because you understood how to be mindful. And I'll explain what that is in a second. So just I can bring that full circle so it makes sense. So I came to understand that that was true. And that's why I wrote this book, which was published in 2018 called Mindfulness Matters, created a short film alongside. And now my thing is just working with how to come back to the media world and do these interesting projects, but always with this bent that I'm trying to cultivate positive change. So whether it's humorous or serious or anything in between, the idea is that all of these gems of well-being and healing inform what I do now. So again, the sort of main flave these days is mindfulness. And that is definitionally a non-judgmental awareness of the present moment. But it's
Yeah.
really the idea that if you can show up to life in this moment, present, even with distractions, noises, sounds, thoughts, things that try to take you away from this moment, the more that you can stay attuned to being here now, the more nectar you extract from life, right? Because life is happening here. It's not yesterday, it's not tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
And the more power, the more empowered you can be with life, because you extract this nectar. That's just another word for power, right? In this moment, what happens? I'm attuned to you, you're attuned to me, and the conversation can be that much more elevated. I'm sitting down to take an exam. If I'm focused on the past, oh, I didn't do so well the last time I took this test, it's probably not going to go so well because my mind is distracted by that thought or some other one. If I'm thinking, if I don't do well on this test, I'm not going to get into Harvard. Again, that's going to eclipse my ability to do well on the exam. But if I'm focused and present in the here and now, I have maximum chance of killing it, right? Just because I know how to focus my attention and be here. So for many reasons, that's what mindfulness is. And that's why I think it's so empowering.
No, I love it. It's so interesting. You were just talking about Harvard. That's how I was introduced to mindfulness is Ronald D. Siegel. He was a professor at Harvard, and he wrote a book of the science of mindfulness. And so that was my initial intro into mindfulness, and I absolutely loved it. There was a meditation that you would do for couples where you would actually stare at the person for 2 minutes. Yeah. And so my boyfriend and I last year for Valentine's Day, we went to the Haleakala crater.
Beautiful. It's one of my favorite spots on the planet.
Oh, really? Okay, so you've been there.
You
know what I'm talking about.
I do.
Yeah, and so we hiked down through this crater, and we ended up going and sitting in a cave, and we did this activity, and it was just the most amazing, one of the more amazing present moments in our relationship where you just absolutely see that person absolutely sees you. And I think that it is so powerful and important to be mindful, be present, be aware, and then also recognize the moments when you are lacking mindfulness, or there's a disconnect, and suddenly you're straying away and you're thinking about all of the things that you need to get done. So I really love that there's that conscious act of, okay, let's center ourselves, let's get focused. What do we need to do in order to be present in this moment? And I think that the people who are practicing that throughout this pandemic are really mentally, they're thriving a lot more, just because it is so important for you to be in the present, not focused on the news, all of these other things that are going on, focused on you. I don't own a television, and part of the reason why is just because I don't want to watch the news every day. I have no calling 100%. To turn it on and
no
see.
Interest in that.
Yeah,
which is probably why I left. And I don't really watch now. I mean, there are a lot of layers there, but I think you're spot on. About getting so conscious, so mindful, so attuned to what is happening in your environment and how that's affecting your psychology and physiology, your energy system. And then from that awareness, making healthier choices, deciding for yourself, this does not feel good in my mind, right? Ergo, it makes me feel depressed, anxious, and everything in between, which was my experience with news, right? I just knew that I was delivering that to people, and on like a conscious integrity level, I was like, oh, that's not good. I can't do that, And so, just getting attentive even to observing that about yourself empowers you to make the change, which is get rid of the TV, right? Because you might be one of these cats that if you have a TV, it's going to be on, right? And so, to even know thyself that well and give yourself the medicine you need, that might be just get rid of the TV full stop, and help yourself with that discipline, to create the energy system around you that is healthy, right? That will nourish you. So that's really astute, and that's not easy. I am a film buff, right? And if I've seen a film that I love, I can watch it 20 times, and it's like super exciting when it comes on TV because I didn't premeditate that. I get even more excited. I'm like, oh my God, I have to watch this for like the 800th time. Is that the best use of my time? And that's, again, where mindfulness comes in, to be able to make those tweaks and changes in your life that, even though they may feel like a challenge at first, right, to get out of habits or to get used to a little more silence and solitude, to spend that hour in nature or practicing yoga or whatever it is that you need to do to cultivate your best self, that empowers you to be able to do it. So you're giving yourself options, you're giving yourself choices when you get more mindful to what's happening.
Yeah, I talk a lot to people about you're giving yourself permission to be fully present, fully aware. And it's a beautiful thing. Right. I wanted to know, with your process of empowerment, your empowerment journey, if you could share a little bit about that and how mindfulness has mingled into it to get you to where you are now.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I think that there are two main inflection points in my life that have kind of paved the way to get to this place. One of them was when I was about 14 years old, and I suffered what I didn't realize at the time, but get now with all of this study of psychology, was a major depression. So I had this depressive episode at 14, and doesn't really matter what the trigger was, although it's an interesting story, just to make it universal that this sort of thing can be triggered by anything at any time, especially in an adolescent brain. And it happens a lot, especially now. So, we just need to be attuned to that fact too, that it's more common than we would all think, and we're not alone in that. So, I had this depression triggered then. And part of what's cool and interesting about this story is that I was in this high octane college prep environment, very competitive, and it was a feeder school to the Ivy League. So when I give that example of like, oh my God, if I don't do well on this test, I won't get into Harvard, that was mad real. And so that was the world that we were living in, and I didn't get a B+ in honors biology my freshman year, and a B+ was the cutoff to get into the honors section of science the next year. So because I got a B, I was put into like the intermediary section. And this just tipped the scales of something that was already, kind of going awry for me, which was that I had exhibited very early skill in anything verbal, English. I was an avid reader when I was a child, like just voraciously devouring books, right? And math, science wasn't really my jam. I was focused on other things, So that was part of it, that I felt invalidated when this happened. So like, why is everybody focusing on the fact that I didn't get this grade? And it became this big federal case, and my parents came to school, and we sat with all the science teachers and the head of the school. And it was this major thing, that my parents were like, what does it mean that she's not going to be in honors? And they had all of these stories and ideas about it, including she'll never get into a great school and she'll never become a doctor, right? It was this whole domino effect. And I'm like this little 14-year-old, slight of build, a little bit introverted. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm a failure. Right. So part of it was focusing on what was going wrong, not what was going right. And the second part was just, not being seen. So that triggered this depressive episode. And interestingly, and this is, I'm coming full circle now to what's kind of cool about this. The majority of my work now in life, and since I started studying positive psychology, that's all about be positive, right?
Mm-hmm.
B plus, be positive. And that's my blood type. So I think it's really interesting that I literally on a cellular level have come to this path and come to embody what it means to be positive. And again, mindfulness, as I went along and discovered it was the most empowering aspect of this learning how to be positive, be balanced, right? And so that's kind of a cool full circle moment for me. And then the second thing I think that really sparked the need to go in the direction of positive psychology, go back to graduate school for something positive, was living in India, being in this marriage that, we almost literally weren't speaking the same language, right? He growing up in India, me growing up in the States. And there were a lot of difficulties in finding resonance. And meanwhile, I'm working at CNBC, right? And killing it as an anchor, but also realizing that something wasn't sitting well. And I think again, at the cellular level, it was my spirit telling me like, you're Miss Be Positive. So what are you doing being negative? So, back to grad school I went, and then the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. I mean, first, your story is very inspiring, and I really love hearing it. I think it's so important for people, especially young people, to actually hear these stories, just because I know for me, I was also a bookworm. I mean, I loved reading. And I think that it is so important for people to understand that everyone has these different talents. So if you're not, if science isn't your jam, math isn't your jam, that doesn't mean you're going to fail and life is over.
Right.
But so many teenagers right now, there's so much pressure to perform. And they're signed up for 1 million athletic events that they have to perform well in. They have all of these different expectations from their parents and the pressures that go along with it. And then you have the pandemic that's going on top of that. So for them, it's very much like,
it's a pressure cooker.
If I don't do this, then my world is over. And I think it's so interesting when you were talking earlier about how siloed we are, because we've replaced, the human connection with a connection through social media or through Zoom. And this has been wonderful in the pandemic for so many reasons to still have that connection, but to have that be the end all be all for so many people.
Yes.
And not understanding the importance of it. Yeah.
Validation, but not genuine validation, which is the vicious cycle that all of us, but mostly young people, right? Because they're developing their social constructs and connections. And so they rely on this interaction to validate them. Yeah. And one of the major problems here is that it's fickle. The social media world can be very fickle. You're not really seeing someone, right? You're not seeing their genuine self. This kind of interaction is helpful, but you and I both know that there is no substitute for being in direct physical connection with somebody. There's so many non-physical cues that we receive from a person's energy. Forget the heart resonance, right? That we're receiving on a subconscious level from each other, right? We're like electromagnetic beings. And so you miss that whole slice of life when you're not in someone's physical sphere. Beyond that, right, there's other physical cues. And again, adolescents are learning those through physical interaction. When you don't have that, and now you're sort of thinking that your world exists in 2D.
Yeah.
What happens when it goes wrong? When you're not getting over 100 likes, or when you're not being validated on that outfit or on that quote that you put up, or whatever it is, right? What happens then? There's this tanking of the psychology, because there's so much external validation that young people rely on in that way, that when that doesn't come, it flips a switch of I'm unworthy, I'm not liked, I'm not loved in the extreme, et cetera, et cetera. And that leads to a lot of the psychological pandemic that we have seen of late, especially in the last couple of years. And I honestly believe, which is why I'm such a huge advocate of mindfulness. I'm certified in teaching mindfulness to kindergarten through 12th graders. So much of what I came to really experience in that year-long certification was being around all of these beautiful teachers. I mean, I was pretty much the only one in the whole crew of, I think it was like 50 of us, who wasn't an actual school teacher. And that gave me this beautiful insight into like what amazing people school teachers are. Okay.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
just the most awesome human beings on the planet. And also that this really is the place of empowerment for us in society. If we could get this knowledge into every school young, because when children are young, their brains are very plastic. By age 7, you lose some of that plasticity, which is why they say before age 7, you could learn any number of languages, no problem. The brain is just a sponge, it'll absorb it all. So if we could get children used to what it means to be mindful and teach them the skills of mindfulness, they'd have that coming into adolescence. And what would happen would be that there would be this strength, this inner strength, like a rod, right? That nothing could touch. So external validation or not, you're internally validated to the extent that nothing can touch you. And that's what happens, that you're so connected to source, right? To your own internal divinity, to the mirror image that you are for all that is divine, that it doesn't get questioned because you know it so well, you're so attuned to it. And then, the rest is just all good, because you can shake off all of that need for external validation or anything else. It's like you have a force field and it can't touch you.
Yeah, no, I get that. I was thinking of just, the work that I'm doing with violence prevention, empowerment, self-defense. I think if everyone was more mindful and actually more present, would we have all of the issues that we have in the world?
No.
No. So I think that it's amazing that in a K through 12 system, I think it would be wonderful if all teachers had that training so that they could implement it with their students. Would there be as much bullying? Would there be as many fights? Or would, if someone was being bullied, would they have the confidence to recognize that something is going on with that other person and be able to walk away?
That's good.
Yeah,
that is such a great question and an astute observation, because in fact, all of this has been studied. Certainly the sort of bullying, aggression side. And when they have, it was at least one school piloted this idea of, okay, instead of like the detention room, we're going to make it a meditation room. So instead of, holding kids hostage, like in a jail, punishing them, negative reinforcement, it became a more positive reinforcement of, what's possible. And even more than that, helping them cultivate the skill of sitting in mindfulness. And what happens is, when you start to practice, it does attune you back to source and self. And that source and self is universal. So barriers and walls come down. You start to see yourself. Oh, I see the thumbs up. I guess it's like the poltergeist in the machine giving me a thumbs up.
It does. It's like it hears it.
It's vibing with me. It's vibing. the walls come down and you start to, it's ego cessation, right? So you start to become a lot less self-aware. So the self-awareness comes down, which is basically ego, and you become attuned to a universal construct, right? The truth of who we are. We're not separate from each other, or anything else in our environment. It's like one big soup. And the more you recognize that, the less inclined you are to be aggressive on another, because you realize that's an act of aggression on self. So you start to become this very conscious, empathic human being, realizing your interconnectedness with the world. And so these kids, you know, who would go into meditation, mindfulness rather than typical detention, they just became completely different beings, and they showed up to their worlds differently, right? And they didn't use anger and aggression as their first tool, but rather empathic response and understanding. And so it really does change the game. You know, it literally does. And even for the soul that may be aggressed upon, you nailed it. Like, that's exactly it. You develop a sense of self that's also universal, and that recognizes you and the other and vice versa. And so it's like, well, what about that, that friend or peer's life caused them to act out in that way? You don't take it personally, right? It becomes just sort of an empathic wondering and curiosity. And in that way also then does not get internalized that you are the problem. Right.
I see. I'm seeing a lot of crossover too between mindfulness training and being trauma informed. So just having a very, taking a step back and having an understanding of that. I'm wondering, 100%. You know, with you and your practice and working with different clients and everything, what are 3 aha moments, like 3 takeaways that you've had from working with them and seeing the transformations that can happen in the power of mindfulness and in action?
That's a great question. The most significant, I think, changes that I've seen are in the young people that I work with. And that has been, the adolescents, so 13, 14 years old, whose parents really are driving the connection, right? They haven't found me on Instagram or anything like that. So it's really through the portal of their parents, which is great because it's a pure portal, that a parent is seeing that there might be a need in their child and making the connection so that it's secure, right? And love-based. And then, as far as the age, it's tricky, if like I said, a child hasn't been receiving this since, they were a few years old, which they should, that would really be a game changer. They're right at about the age that can understand the value of this in their lives and come to the work ready, receptive. So I have seen that in the teenagers I've worked with right around this age group. They are very open to what it can do for them. And they're ready to sort of sit in a certain amount of silence and stillness without getting too agitated. And then really come to the benefit of what's happening and what it's all about. So I have 2 great examples, from teens that I've worked with. One, he was struggling with a lot of anxiety in school. And I think a part of that was also just feeling like he didn't quite fit in, which was the precursor to bullying, right?
Yeah.
Generally is. And he could feel that in his cells that it was going down that path. And he also went to a high octane sort of college prep school.
Ooh.
So, in our work together, what was so magical to witness was that he was having a lot of difficulty. He would use phrasing like, this person or that person in school was so annoying, right? And annoying was his word for, their energy makes me feel really uncomfortable and I don't know what to do with it. And it was also a blanket word for, trauma, trauma experiences that he was having in school. And the only phrasing that he had was, it's annoying, because it felt so uncomfortable in his body. And through this practice of mindfulness and some talk therapy with him, around sit with what is, right? The essence of mindfulness, try not to judge it, non-judgmental awareness of what is in this moment, in any moment. And so try not to react, but just allow yourself to take some space to be with what is. And then look at what happens in your mind and your body when you give it some space, right? So your first reaction, and then mindful pause, and then what's happening? How do you feel? Now, the shelf life of an emotion, any emotion, is 90 seconds, right? So if you just even give it a minute, the peak of that heightened emotional awareness will wane. And we make very different choices from that place. So what he came to realize through his own work and experience and trial with this was, oh yeah, sure enough, when he didn't just react and he showed up and he allowed the emotion to wane, he could make a very different choice, whatever he chose. And the point is that he started choosing very differently. He would come back to our sessions and give me all of these examples of like how he had showed up to a dynamic differently and how it was a game changer, and he wasn't describing the game changer. He was just like, Pax, like I did that. I tried it. And oh my God. And then this person did that. And like now, and he's in this happy place, right? So brilliant to watch that unfold with him. I had another teen who, a high performing athlete, and she took that very seriously. And because she had that competitive spirit, she also took her academics very seriously. So there was a lot of pressure on her. And she was on Adderall.
Ooh.
And, I don't want to go on a sort of tangent rant, but very quickly, we do live in a world where we are very quick to medicate and get rid of symptoms that are indicative of a source problem. And when we medicate in a symptomology way, we are just patching with a Band-Aid the thing that's really problematic.
Yes.
You're feeling me? I think this is really resonating with you. And what we need to learn how to do is attune to the source of the problem and work from there, right? So we're so quick to do this with our young people, especially, like, oh, they can't focus, they've got ADHD, and stick them on Ritalin or Adderall. And it's like, no, they're so overstimulated. They have so many distractions on their attention with these devices. How could we expect anybody to concentrate? And now there's this pressure cooker that we've put them in. So I attuned her to some of this awareness, subtly, slowly. And we flexed mindfulness. I helped her understand how mindfulness could be a tool at her disposal to learn how to focus her attention. That maybe might mean she didn't need this other tool, right? And she got it. She got what I was saying, and she got that she didn't want to be dependent or addicted to this thing outside of her. She got the empowerment of that. And so as we started to practice together, she started to come down on her dose. So in this very real physical way, mindfulness was undercutting and taking the place of this substance that, is just one atom. I think it's hydrogen, if I'm not mistaken, away from meth. Adderall is. And that says it all. They're cousins of each other in biochemistry. Actually, you could call them siblings. Yeah. And, that's very concerning. We all know what meth can do to a body. And if we're putting, especially our young people, on Adderall, we really must think about that, the chemical composition, how closely tied they are. And therefore, what is that doing to a young mind?
Yeah, developmentally, most people aren't fully developed. Women aren't fully developed until 23. You have
Right.
adult men who aren't fully developed until 25. So if you're thinking
Right.
about what that does to their brains, as you're talking to me, it's very interesting because I'm thinking about a lot of the women who I've worked with, who are trauma survivors, and so many of them
Mhm.
have gone through, and they get these diagnoses. They get put on medications, and
Mhm.
it's like, oh, let's put you on an anti-anxiety medication because you have this,
Mhm.
and you'll have
That's right.
that for the rest of your life. So I feel like, and I think that everything has a place under the moon and the sun. It's like a Chinese proverb, but I think about people, they provide for themselves with where they're at. I know that for myself, being a trauma survivor, I was put on bupropion, which is it's an amphetamine. It's like a
Mhm.
low dose amphetamine, and I knew for myself, this isn't in alignment with me. This isn't what I want for my life. I don't feel present. I just feel sort of dull.
Yes.
And so I know that for myself, I made the conscious decision, and it was a really hard one because it was like, I have family who's in the medical industry, who was very much like, don't do it. If you do this, then you're going to have this array of problems.
Mm.
um, but I thought that it was so important for me to go down this journey of figuring out the root. Why do I get anxiety? What are the things that I need to do for myself so that I can center myself and be present? And so I think that what you're talking about with mindfulness can be a game changer for so many people who have experienced trauma.
Mm.
um, and
That is so
I don't know if you.
self-aware and
Yeah.
courageous that you could do that, because the culture we're in, and that's another layer of muscle, right? That if you have family friends, your family doctor, right, telling you that this is okay, and in fact saying you won't be okay if you're not on it, that's a very difficult muscle to push back against. Not to mention what's happening at a societal level, right? To sort of validate um, being on something, like it's cool, right? And yet, as you experienced for yourself, you had the awareness, the mindfulness to realize this is not taking care of the problem or anything. In fact, it's dulling me out to showing up to life the way I'd want.
It did
And
feel very
so,
much like a band-aid.
yeah, and you're band-aiding, and now you're disconnected from yourself, right? And it doesn't feel good. And it's really important that we start healing ourselves from the inside. I mean, those traumas, any trauma settles into the cells. And so it's going to sit there. The body remembers, right? The body keeps the score. It's going to sit there until we deal with it. And the
Yeah.
more we try to shut it down, the more it's going to try to express itself in other ways. And so, it behooves us certainly to heal ourselves from the inside out. And, I think, especially when it comes to trauma, mindfulness can be very helpful to just learn how to be comfortable with the uncomfortable and watch what is. But I think, with trauma, it's also important to couple that maybe with other modalities that can hold space for what's coming up, so that you're not alone in dealing with that. A lot of therapy, a therapist across from you can really help in holding the container for some of the really intense difficulty that might appear, right? Because mindfulness in general is sort of a solo autonomous practice. So that's one thing to bear in mind. And also, as a bit of a digression, but an important one, medicine work, any medicine work, including Kundalini yoga, right? That is a practice sort of designed to shake things out of your body and just keep things dynamic and moving. Ayahuasca I've worked with many times, and just the action of it is to sort of integrate with your body at a cellular level and shake out whatever's no longer serving, and then you purge it. That's like really the action of what this medicine is about.
Yeah. And there's so many different support systems. You had mentioned therapy. I also know of people who are doing EMDR, brain spotting, parts work, all of these different aspects that can be very helpful. I was just thinking about this, you know, from listening to your story at 14 and all of the journey to where you are now. If you could give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, that's a lovely one. That's a lovely one. Well, outside of saying, I wish I had someone like me in my world, you know, a coach who could just validate me on a lot of the strengths-based approaches, right? Growth for resilience, post-traumatic growth included, but, you know, also a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. If I could have had somebody like that, if every youngster could have a coach in their corner teaching them these things at that age, oh my gosh, the thriving we would see. You know, and I say this a lot, like, I wish I had someone like me back then. So that's kind of the first thing I would say. But, you know, in the absence of an external force being able to come in and work with me on some of these things, I guess on an intrinsic level, I would have said to me or reminded me to follow my own course. You know, that if there were things that I was skilled in, good at, it was up to me not just to be good at them, but to advocate for that beauty, you know, and use my voice to say, this is what I want, right? Speaking of empowerment, to learn at a very young age how to empower oneself in one's strengths, right? And articulate those and draw a line, you know, set boundaries and say, like, this is me and this is my energy and this is how I want to show up. And the more we do that, the more we stake claim to our power, to our essence, you know, the better we get at showing up to our lives fully, wholly, and completely.
Absolutely.
And happily.
So, yes, very true. I'm also just wondering, just, you know, everybody who's been watching, if they are just suddenly like, I want to work with you, or I want to find you, how would they reach you?
Yeah, lovely question. Thank you for asking. These days, I am mostly a speaker, a teacher, a writer. I don't have as much time to do one-on-one client work, but I'm always happy to give referrals to some fabulous people. In the meantime, then the best way to receive what I have to offer is to buy the book, Mindfulness Matters, which was the culmination of a very long journey for me, you know, so all of the information I put in that book comes from a very pure and loving place of just wanting to give people back what I had received, wanting to serve in that way. So that's really like the most high octane way, is to buy the book. I voiced the audio version too. So if you're more into audio, pick that up and you'll hear my voice. And now that you know me, at least in this kind of context, people really love that, you know, that they feel like Pax is in their car, in their living room, talking right to them. So, you know, that's a lovely way to avail. I'm also on Instagram at Pax Tandon, Facebook, but DM on Instagram is better. So if there are any questions or a desire for a referral or anything else, you can hit me up there.
Awesome. Well, Pax, thank you so much for coming on. This was great.
You are a beautiful spirit. It was such a pleasure. Enjoy that good Hawaiian juju.
Oh yeah, I am.
Yeah, and love, keep doing what you're doing. You know, it's such powerful work.
Thank you. Well, here I'm going to.
So mahalo and aloha.